Hello everyone! After a whole month of spooky-themed mini-reviews, it's now time to share what else I saw in October. This list will consist mostly of the war movies and westerns we watched with my dad, who does not care for scary movies. Movie number 1 is 1944's The Fighting Seabees. John Wayne stars in this war film about the formation of the 1st Construction Battalion. After his work crew suffers several casualties in a confrontation with the Japanese because the Navy wouldn't arm civilians, he and Dennis O'Keefe's naval officer set out to get the rules changed. The film felt a little longer than its 100-minute length, but it's got some cool action scenes. You know the battle at the end of Disney's Beauty and the Beast, where the occupants of the castle fight the mob using furniture and silverware and things? It kind of reminded me of that, the men fighting the enemy with all the machinery and tools at their disposal. Susan Hayward co-stars as O'Keefe's reporter girlfriend who tags along to write articles promoting their cause, and she falls for Wayne a bit on the way. Wayne and Hayward teamed up again a dozen years later in The Conqueror. The less said about that film, the better. They also appeared in 1942's Reap the Wild Wind together. That's a good film, and as far as I know, nobody got sick making it. I do have a hard time remembering which John Wayne war movie is which, but I don't think this is one of the better ones. It's definitely not as good as Sands of Iwo Jima or They Were Expendable, but it's okay. Dennis O'Keefe was a little bland, but the supporting ensemble had some standouts. Movie number 2 is a viewer recommendation, I think, and another war movie, 1951's Target Unknown, starring Mark Stevens. When an American bomber squadron gets shot down, the Germans use every wily trick in the book to pump their new prisoners for information. And though the men have been warned repeatedly not to give more than their name, rank, and serial number, they end up spilling an awful lot of beans. Horrified to realize their mistake, they finally start making some smart decisions. Can you tell I got a little frustrated with some of these characters? I was not impressed with how easily they fell for the Nazis' cunning ploys. But then again, this is a movie, and they needed something to drive the plot forward, so obtuse flyers flapping their gums is what they went with. It actually was a pretty good movie. The setup of the prison was interesting, as were the traps, and the third act had very good tension. It just had a couple things that made me wrinkle my old-fashioned patriotic nose. Movie number 3 is 1940's The Man I Married, which is a pre-war film set in the mid to late 30s. Joan Bennett stars as a chic magazine columnist, quite happy with her German-born husband, played by Francis Lederer. But when he brings her and their son on a visit to his homeland to take care of some factory business, he falls prey to a former gal pal, played by Anna Sten, overflowing with praise for the new Germany. He gets swept up in Nazi rhetoric, leaving Bennett to wonder what happened to the man she married. I went into this under the impression that it would contain a lot of newsreel footage and just have a loose storyline, but that was not the case. It's a real movie, start to finish, one that boldly tackled fanaticism and anti-Semitism at a time when many Americans, if they were even aware that that was going on in Europe, didn't want to confront it. This works well as a companion to The Mortal Storm, also 1940, or 1939's Confessions of a Nazi Spy, which also co-stars Francis Lederer as a German-American Nazi sympathizer. And I've reviewed both of those films within the last year. A young Lloyd Nolan plays a fast-talking American correspondent in Berlin who befriends Bennett, and I really enjoyed his refreshing character. He's the good guy we'd all like to have in our corner in such a situation, and his light personality helps cleanse the palate after some scenes. All of the performances are good. At the time, Bennett received some mediocre reviews, but I think she gave a more realistic, understated interpretation of the increasingly disturbed wife than some other actresses might have. What's depicted here may be an extreme example of someone being wooed by the dark side, but I didn't think it was so overdramatic as to lose its credibility. Stuff like this did happen, and in a way, still does. If you're wondering, I watched this just before October 7th. It was relevant at that time, and I am appalled to say it's become even more relevant in the last few weeks. Movie number 4 is not a World War II movie, but it is related. It's 1975's Inside Out, in which a couple American war vets band up with a couple German war vets to track down hidden Nazi treasure. There's just one man who knows its location, and he is being held in maximum security prison. Seeing as this came out in the 70s, it could either have been dark and cynical, or wild and bombastic. It is the latter. It's an action-adventure film where our heroes come up with a crazy idea to get rich, bluffing their way through complicated situations with bluster and bravado. Telly Savalas plays their snazzy, overconfident leader. James Mason is the former commandant, a worrywart who doesn't get the American sense of humor, and Robert Culp is the unlucky guy who has to do most of the running around. I've never seen him in a comedic role, but he was quite funny here. Also featured are Aldo Ray and Gunter Meissner, who is great as a mild, lily-livered actor wannabe who takes on the role of Hitler, which is extra humorous if you know that he went on to play Hitler several more times down the road. Ultimately, I enjoyed this aggressively 70s film. I got a kick out of the characters and their interactions and the daring plan they come up with. I'm not sure my parents were into it. My mom was pretty stone-faced through the whole thing, which is not a great sign for a movie that is more or less a comedy, but I guess she just wasn't in the mood for a jaunty but dangerous treasure hunt adventure. That wraps up all the war-related films. Movie number 5 is 1962's Diamond Head, a drama that stars Charlton Heston as a wealthy landowner in Hawaii who is being courted to run for the newly minted U.S. Senate seat. But his perfect life gets turned upside down when his impetuous kid sister, played by Yvette Mimieux, comes home from school and declares she's going to defy convention and marry the young Hawaiian native she grew up with. This story about racial tensions, the interracial marriage controversy, and class clashes has a lot of overlap with films like Sayonara and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, both of which I've previously reviewed, but in my estimation, it is much messier than either of those films. Everybody's got issues. Heston's character is a massive hypocrite with a temper, and his sister is foolish and stubborn, plus there's some weird Freudian stuff going on there. I didn't like either of them. I couldn't side with either of them. George Chakiris's mixed-blood doctor is about the most reasonable guy around, but even he does some distasteful things that make it harder to root for him. I will say this movie had surprising plot twists that just kept on coming, but each one made the story more complicated and more depressing and more of a mess. It was kind of a Peyton Place or King's Row type entanglement, and that's not really my jam. So even though I really wanted to see this while I had the opportunity, I didn't enjoy it. Movie number 6 is 1951's Gunplay, a serial western of sorts that stars Tim Holt as Tim Holt. He and his sidekick, Cheeto Rafferty, played by Richard Martin, sign on as hands at Joan Dixon's ranch, but instead they wind up helping a boy track down the man who had his father killed. I didn't even know Tim Holt was associated with westerns, but apparently it was his main gig. It's the thing he did most, the thing he liked best, the thing that he always wanted to do, and this is one of many westerns he was in. It's a short, no-frills film that is light on dialogue and character development. There were obvious spots where the story could have been expanded, like the shootout at the house. I'd have loved to see the beginning of that, but this was a low-cost B-movie, and as such, it served its purpose. The whole time I was wondering who was taking care of the livestock and mucking out the stalls, because clearly none of these characters were doing it, but it was a pleasant diversion with likable leads undertaking an honorable quest to see justice rightfully served. Movie number 7 is 1955's The Private War of Major Benson. Charlton Heston stars as the tough-talking major who shoots his mouth one too many times and finds himself sent to supervise the ROTC program at an underperforming military school. I was intent on watching as many spooky movies as possible last month, but when Turner Classic Movies added these two rarely played Charlton Heston films that I had been wanting to see but couldn't get from the library to their streaming app, I had to find a way to fit them in. I actually watched The Private War of Major Benson several times as a child. My mom was quite fond of it. She's always liked Charlton Heston, and she taped it so our family could watch it, which we did. A lot. But it's been many years since I saw it last. It's a cute take on the fish-out-of-water premise. Major Benson plops into the situation with no clue that the cadets are children and the school is run by nuns. Once he claps eyes on the school's attractive doctor, played by Julie Adams, all he wants to do is flirt with her, but she keeps him at arm's length and urges him to take a fatherly approach to the kids rather than barking out orders and expecting them to act like full-grown soldiers. What follows is fairly predictable, but like I said, it's cute. In some ways, this is exactly the kind of character you expect Heston to play, but this much comedy, including some slapstick, is very unusual for him, and I think you can kind of tell. Even that is funny, though, so it's an entertaining movie. It's also got an enjoyable supporting cast. Child actor Tim Hovey gets a big part as the tiny cadet who has trouble keeping his pants up. Also featured are Sal Mineo, just before his breakout in Rebel Without a Cause, William Demarest, young Tim Considine, and David Jansen in a small part at the beginning. Movie number 8 is a viewer recommendation, 1950's Stars in My Crown. Joel McCrea plays a Southern parson who leads his small, rough community as it deals with death, change, sickness, greed, mischief, and prejudice. Based on a blurb I read just before watching the movie, I initially thought this was going to be a movie where McCrea plays a gun-toting preacher who shoots up the KKK. That would have been pretty awesome, but that's not exactly how it goes, although the character does have a swell introduction. Reportedly, this was Joel McCrea's favorite of the films he made, and I can see why. It's a great movie, directed surprisingly by Jacques Tourneur. And I bet the film was a pleasure to make. McCrea is relaxed and seems at home in the role and with his fellow actors, and the character is a God and family-oriented man who perseveres through adversity and defeats bad guys with faith rather than violence. Ellen Drew co-stars as McCrea's pragmatic but loving wife, and young Dean Stockwell is her orphaned nephew who they've taken in. He is scampish and rambunctious, but also sensitive and sweet, as Stockwell's adolescent characters often were. The film also features Alan Hale's final role, and it was a great one to go out on, one of my favorite performances I've seen from him, and unexpectedly poignant. But it's got strong performances all around, and it's got a good, wholesome message. In general, I'd say it's the kind of movie Hollywood just doesn't make anymore. Movie number 9 is a viewer recommendation, 1975's The Night That Panicked America. This TV movie recreates events surrounding the broadcast of Orson Welles' Mercury Theater radio adaptation of The War of the Worlds, which aired on October 30th, 1938. And we watched the movie on October 30th. I thought this was excellent. I loved how it showed the behind-the-scenes chaos of the production, with last-minute revisions, actors on standby, in-studio musicians. The sound lady was my favorite, frantically running around, experimenting with various objects, trying to create the right sound effect. I was struck by how complicated it must have been to pull this off again and again, week after week. Yet it appears to come together so smoothly, thanks to the professionalism and talent and cleverness of the people involved. The cast is great. The actor who played Orson Welles didn't really look like him, but that was okay. He had the right presence and mystique and even a hint of wicked humor. The voice was the most important thing, and it was a solid match. I do think they used audio from the real broadcast, but I'm not sure when, which means it was pretty seamlessly integrated. Strongly emphasized is the country's uneasy state, with everyone eyeing Germany and bracing for the outbreak of war in Europe at any moment. This was a uniquely intense time, an atmosphere ripe for hysteria, and the broadcast turned out to be just the right trigger for a panic. The film focuses on various groups across the country who catch the show and, misunderstanding it, act on what they believe to be a violent Martian invasion in full swing. What unfolds is intriguing and humorous until the situation almost leads to tragedy. This truly was a one-of-a-kind event, something that was intended to be good radio and ended up being a little too good, leading to a mass freakout of legendary proportions. And the film did a fantastic job conveying that. And that wraps up everything I saw in October. Doing a month of mini reviews was fun. I certainly got to watch a lot more movies, and I was able to get more spooky movie recommendations out to you, which I know some of you took advantage of, and that's great. I got through a lot of films on my recommendations list, and it was fun. But it wasn't exactly a break. I wanted a break from solo reviews for a while, and I got that, but those videos took just as long to make as the usual content, so it's not like it was a vacation. But it was a good experience overall for me, and I hope that it was for you as well. I hope you enjoyed this video. As usual, you can find the films that I talked about here today listed in the description, along with information about how I watched them. Let me know your thoughts on any of these titles in the comments below if you'd like to, and I will be back at it with the solo movie reviews next week. Thanks for watching.